We've got some really fun, we're gonna have a really fun conversation today, I think. And since it is 11, I'm gonna go ahead and start. I am Sarah Young, I'm the Director of Communications at APT, and I am your host today for our final Backstage series event of the season, which we call Playing Through the Pandemic. Basically, how are these folks doing this season? So we've got a great panel, and panelists, I would love to have you turn on your cameras at this point and join me. And we will introduce you to our group. Is that everybody? Yes, that is everybody. So it's so great to see everybody this morning. And I'm going to ask you to introduce yourselves and just say who you are and what you do at APT. And I'm going to just go in the order of folks on my screen, which would start with Leah.
Hey, I'm Lea Branyan. This is my 5th season at APT. I'm the deck chief, which here means on a normal season, there's rep, and we do, you can come for a weekend, you see like 4 different shows. The set has to change between each show, and that's what my crew does. This season is kind of the same. I'm still moving sets around, but it's lots of scheduling, lots of pushing heavy objects and whatnot. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Leah. Ron.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ron Román-Meléndez. I am an actor here with APT. It's my first year ever with everybody here. So I was in a show earlier, and I'm understudying now.
Great. Thanks, Ron. Elise.
Hi, my name is Alys Dickerson. I am an actor here. This is technically my 3rd season, theoretically my 2nd. I'm an actor in Cymbeline right now, and I'm also one of the curriculum creatives for Words Between Us, which is our education program at APT.
Wow, that's shocking, Elise, that this is your 2nd or 3rd season, depending on how you count, because it just feels like it's like 8 or 10 for you.
Oh, I love that. Nice.
Lynn.
I'm the wardrobe supervisor here. I am in charge of a crew of usually 3 to 4. This year it's 3, including myself. My job is to make sure the costumes look good after they leave the costume shop, and that they look as close as possible to when from the first performance through the last performance. So lots of steaming, lots of ironing, lots of quick changes, and a myriad of other things like that.
Wonderful. Thanks, Lynn. Michael Broh.
Hi, I'm Mike. I am the production manager at APT. This is my 22nd season, I believe. And I'm responsible for everything that goes on backstage and in the shop. So costume, scenery, props, lighting, sound, crew, all that fun stuff.
Great. Kelsey.
Hi, I'm Kelsey. I'm an actor in the core company. I started out as an apprentice in 2008, and it is my 11th season. So happy to be here.
And Mr. Jamal James.
Hello. Jamal James, actor, as well as a co-curator / creator of Words Between Us with Elise and David Daniel. And I will say it's 3rd season because David Daniel says it's 3rd. Even though it feels like it's my 2nd, it's 3rd. It's technically 3rd. So I'm going to keep that. Run with that.
Also feels like it's your 10th, but it's great. All right. Well, thank you all for being here this morning. I want to just start with Michael Broh. And Michael, you are our head safety person here at APT. And so I was wondering if you could just give us a brief overview. I know that it is not a brief story. If you could give us a brief overview of the planning that went into this season, safety-wise.
Yeah, okay, great question. It's a process because it wasn't just about implementing a plan. It was about, first of all, understanding what the disease was and understanding what other people's plans were when nobody was producing and figuring out what it was we needed to do. And there was so much research involved, and had a great team of people, primarily Carrie Stebbins and Sarah Stellick here at APT. But the plan basically has evolved a lot over the last year and a half. But for this year and producing this year, focused on first masks, social distancing, and vaccinations. Those were really our three core things. We did a lot of addressing like washing your hands and like wiping everything down. But, you know, as we lived through this pandemic, we learned that the things that we were most focused on early on turned out to be less important than some of the other things that we were focused on, such as masking, social distancing, and vaccines. At the same time, Carrie Stebbins led an amazing effort to update our ventilation systems so that we could be getting as much fresh air as possible into the rooms where the most people were going to be, or where people were going to be working, potentially without masks, such as actors in rehearsal, or any number of situations where it was too complicated to be really rigorous about masking, let's say. That's kind of the nickel tour. Is that more or less?
That's great. That's great. Thank you, Michael. And for the rest of you, I'm just curious to know what your thoughts were as you, and if we have time, we'll maybe go back and talk about, you know, the Zoom year. But for this, I kind of want to concentrate more on the post-Zoom year, at least on stage, as we're sitting here on Zoom. But I'd love to hear from any of you what you were thinking. Were you expecting a call that we were going to be on stage at APT this season? How were you scared? How did APT prepare you for this? And anybody can start.
I'll jump in.
Oh.
I didn't have a contract for the 2020 season, so I knew coming in 2021, because I had moved on to a full-time job, and I was hoping that 2021 would be back because my partner works here. And they were offered a contract, and I was sad sitting in the corner because I had no contract, but I was supportive and was hoping that I was working at a Lowe's, and was like, I'll just come and I'll figure it out, because we needed to get back to what we were doing. But first I was then offered to be a crew person on the crew I'm currently in charge of. And then I was offered to be a master electrician. Just like every week, I feel like I was moving up a little bit. And then I got the call that the person who was going to be the deck chief in 2020 did not want their contract. So they offered it to me, and I was like, yes, perfect. That's the one I want, because it's in my bones. It's like, I know how to do it. And I knew I was going to have less crew this year because we were working with lower numbers, smaller shows. So I was trying to figure out how to do kind of the same job with just less people, and just like coming up with a plan, like, okay, do I have to disinfect tools? I have to make sure tools are all separate. Everyone has like pouches for their own tools, and like doing changeovers in 90-degree weather with masks on, and like, how's that going to work? And how do I keep everyone's spirits up when we're doing that? Like, you got to put them on, I got to put the hard hat on. And just sort of like the fear that we could close at any second. Like, we would get there and we would leave our lives in Chicago and then would not have work. And that was scary.
Awesome. Elise, you also had you were going to say something there. Thanks, Leah.
Echo everything Leah said too. Insofar as not talking about the Zoom year, it's crazy because I feel like you can't really talk about post-Zoom without talking about Zoom.
Yeah,
because
you can talk about Zoom year.
Well, I understand the sentiment completely, but I, being an actor, really took for granted what it meant to walk on a stage and talk to people and be seen and be witnessed. And, you know, beforehand, it was, for me personally, feeling like, you know, running to the next gig and auditioning and trying to book. And once you book, you feel, you know, there was just such a normalization that I had done. And then it all kind of took. So when they cast me in Cymbeline, which was birthed actually on Zoom, it was kind of a big experiment, and now it's on stage. It's pretty incredible what we're doing physically with our bodies, which once only existed in this medium. So I would just say, APT, we kind of prepared each other, right? Artists helped APT prepare. APT helped us prepare. It was a sharpening that happened. And now when I'm out there up the hill, like every second, every element, every challenge of the elements, I can appreciate like I hadn't before, because I was taking every second of it for granted pre-COVID. So I would say just a new sense of appreciation for what we do, and not to, it's just not lost on me, this art form, and how lucky I am to still do it.
Well, that's beautiful. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
I have something to add.
Oh, go ahead, Kelsey.
Okay. I don't think any of us really knew how this was going to shake out. I mean, we still don't sometimes, but I have to say, I commend APT for taking on 9 productions post Zoom and saying, we're going to do as many shows as possible, because that meant we could employ as many people as possible. And if you're an actor in the Actors Union, then your health insurance eligibility is determined by how many weeks you work per year. And when all of us were mostly unemployed last year, aside from Zoom, we then became uninsured individuals as well, which was really scary during COVID. So many of the conversations I was having with artistic and in the core company were about prioritizing people's needs financially in terms of health insurance, and also getting as many people vaccinated who wanted to be vaccinated before the season started. So when I walked into rehearsal for Rough Crossing, every single person in every single building was vaccinated, which made me feel like we were existing in this we were at Disney World, we were the NBA, you know what I mean? Like, we were existing in this little safe bubble. And I'll never forget the way that APT across the board has handled this. It has been exemplary, truly. So I'm amazed every day that we're still producing, but here we are.
Thank you for that, Kelsey. Lynn, you were going to jump in.
Yeah. So I actually was working at a large company, or I freelance the rest of the year normally, and was working at a large company in Chicago when the pandemic hit, and was laid off on Friday the 13th. I will never forget that. But after months of other work that was not theater related, I remember getting a call when I was at my workplace from Michael Broh, and he's like, "I'd like to talk to you about the 2021 season." And I was like, yeah. I was so excited. And shortly after that, I actually got some work doing a filmed performance in Chicago with another company. We still have to, we had every kind of precaution. We had K95 masks, we had face shields, we had to wear gloves. We obviously had to, it was about a week and a half, 2-week gig, and we had to have negative tests every 4 days. And I was, thinking, like, if this is what I have to do what I love, then that's what I'll do. And yeah, it's a pain. And it's not going to last forever. I'm very much believe that. But I was like, if I have to mask up, if I have to wear gloves, if I have to, then I'll do that, because more than anything, that gig was like a breath of air, because it was like, familiarness. Like, even with all of these things in place and temperature checks and we were like sterilizing everything. We were steaming all the clothes, even if they didn't need to be steamed, because it was killing anything that was on it. And this was before we know what we know now about surfaces. And so, but the amount of work that it took to just do those 3 filmings, I was like, if this is what APT is going to be like, then it's not great, but if that's what I have to do, then that's what I have to do, and that's fine. We prior to coming here, we did a lot of Zoom meetings with Michael Broh about and online training, webinars about being a COVID compliance officer and what kind of precautions and the science behind it and everything. So I definitely felt prepared and, for what we were going to be doing this season in terms of COVID prevention.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Thank you, Lynn. Ron, can I ask you, you had never worked at APT before.
Mm-mm.
And, but you kind of rode out, actually a few of you sort of rode out the pandemic here in Spring Green.
Yeah.
Can you talk about like why and how and what that was like?
Oh man. Well, yeah, actually when I first came to Spring Green, Elise lived across the hall from me and Jamal was in the next building, and that's when I first met the two of them. And so it's been this really fascinating. I mean, it's like Kelsey said, it's been this little world that has existed in and of itself, kind of separate from the rest of the country, thanks to like where Spring Green is and just what we were able to do on account of that. But yeah, I feel like so many of us have that story of like, where were you when you got the news that all of your productions shut down? Like, what show were you about to go on for when you got the call? Oh, actually, we're stopping because we're all shutting down. And I remember, I was working a contract with another theater out in Virginia at the time, and we were about to open our 4th show in our rep. And we were like, well, we're shutting down. So in the middle of that, we decided to try to put everything on a streaming platform. But at the same time, I was also trying to have to account for the fact that my housing was dependent on that contract. And I had been working with them for so long that it was like, in terms of like a place that's home, I was like, cool, I'm about to lose a roof. And as you know, as the fates and the cosmos would have it, as I was putting my mind to that, I got a call from Carrie Cannon because the plan was at the time that I would be coming up to be in the River Bride, specifically amongst other shows. And which I think is also a testament to what this company does and how much care that this company has for its actors and its artists and its producers, that she said, look, we don't want any of our people to go without a roof just because we're not producing. You would have had a contract. The space is here. If you need it, it's up here. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to need that, please. And so I came up in June with like all of my stuff, all of it.
So
because also like
not this last June, but June of 2020. Yeah.
Right. June in the middle of 2020. And I mean, because like home for me is still Puerto Rico. So I couldn't exactly drive home. If somebody can figure out how to get a car across that water, let me know. So in kind of balancing what's going to happen and everything being a question mark and everything being nebulous, kind of every disaster movie I had ever seen was starting to kind of come true in terms of like quarantines and like all of these new kind of scary phrases that just became part of everyday life now. Oh, what's your pod? What are your safety protocols? What's, like I never knew that part of my reality would always be knowing how much hand sanitizer is in my house, where it is, and when I might need to restock it, and what stores around me have them. And so in the middle of all that, we ended up in Spring Green, and and the experience of getting to know APT from there, it was interesting because yeah, I know I'm very aware of the fact that I'm yet to fully experience not just APT operating at full capacity, but also Spring Green operating at full capacity. And I mean, I over the pandemic, I ended up doing a bunch of Zoom readings for restoration plays. That was like an interesting and then I was some friends of mine, they were doing this series. They were like, Ron, we're doing a bunch of restoration plays. I was like, sure, it's better than staring at the corner of my wall again for another week. And so navigating that and then being able to come up into Spring Green and kind of getting to know, what I loved about it was that I feel like I got to know the town with all kind of the defenses down. I mean, for lack of a better term, because it's I came up here and I got to know people first before like producing anything. I feel like, especially coming into a big operation, it can be intimidating as a new face in a company like APT, because it's like so many like so many people who are doing work that I think is so good, and they're on top of that also good humans. And so it's like, oh man, like I hope we're all actors are weird, but I hope they like my kind of weird. And it was cool to find that home. There was that feeling of, yo, there are greater things at play. The world needs people to be kind to each other. And it felt like coming into that. And I mean, similar to what Leah said of like working your way up, I picked up a bunch of random odd jobs. Like my first job with APT was mowing the lawns.
Right. I remember that. Yeah. At
the Baltimores and at the Coles. And then after that, I was shoveling sidewalks for a little while around town. I didn't know that raking a roof was a thing. I now know it is. And great. That's a thing I would love to never have to do again in my life. And then I started working with maintenance over with Matt Erdman. So it's like I started helping him out because they needed an extra hand. And my background before I became an actor was in tech. So I was like, I know how to use power tools without completely hurting myself. And so it's like I got to know the theater kind of from the ground up, which to me was very valuable. Like I very much appreciated that. Like before I even got to act up the hill or in the Touchstone, I helped Matt like put all the boards up to cover the seats so that they could be protected for the winter. And so it was kind of it sucked because the pandemic was happening and none of us were doing the work that we like love to do physically in presence of other humans, but I still felt like I was able to have that connection with the space itself, and especially that up the hill space, which is such a living thing. Yeah, it was amazing. So that when I finally got onto the boards for Improbable Fiction, I was like, oh, okay. Let me just like add this element into that. And even then, like I've only experienced that from the stage, like at 20, because I think Improbable Fiction was only ever operating at 25%.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So yeah, I'm aware of how much I'm yet to even know.
Right. It's so interesting.
Yeah.
Jamal, how did you find yourself riding out this, being in Spring Green, and you were here quite a bit, right?
Yeah. It was funny because when the pandemic hit and Cuomo shut down where I was in New York in March, I just opened a show the day before and that show went kaput. And it was a new play and it devastated the playwright, devastated him. But I needed money for my rent and I wanted to like help out as best I can. So I started working for a hospital that was dealing with seniors to feed them and clean. And I was like, if I can do something, I felt pretty good about that. I did that for about 2 months, and Carrie and Brennan had contacted me saying, hey, we know that you're in the city, but if you need a place to hide out, because the city is like rampant with COVID, if you need a place, come here. And the thing is that APT is a family for me. And not to make her blush, but Alys Dickerson is like one of my best friends. And I got that from my first year working at APT. And if I can't go home because I'm worried about like infecting my family and all that kind of things, where better than to hide out than with, family, a second family or your best friends, or like what is better than that? And even though it was very hard some days of just being secluded in that environment, it was still a very much a blessing. So it was difficult because I wasn't even sure. My first, like after Zoom readings and things like that, my first foray wasn't even with APT, it was with Forward. And I thought that what was going on with Forward was going to happen with APT because there weren't enough, like I know Equities was being weird with APT. I knew like filmings were going around. I was like, are we just going to do a show, it get filmed, and then it just is like a theatrical run on people's screens for like a month or two? I wasn't sure that we were actually going to be able to get on a stage. But the thing is that what made me feel more comfortable is the same thing that I think Kelsey brought up, is that APT was going out of its way to make sure that everyone felt safe. And that for me, the phrase is better. Like right now, for me, art cannot just come back the way it was before. We've talked about like different types of problems with the way the world was running. And if theater is going to come back, it has to come back better. And Brenda was like, we need to come back better. That's not just like safety wise, but also like financially for people to be safe and secure with their families and with their insurance, as well as like the stories that we tell and why we're telling them and what we're trying to do for our audience. Like Brenda was actively trying to make that part of the conversation, which made me even more psyched to work here and be here. So that's how I felt. It was it was strange to not be in the home that I had been with for like 6 years, to very much not even be close to family or the environment that I had cultivated for myself, that I feel like a lot of people who were around me already had. But it was weird, but like it was a weird time.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Those are great. Some great points there. I just wanted to tell our those watching on the other side of the webinar that that Q&A box is there for you. I have lots more questions, but we would more than that love to answer your questions. So get those into the Q&A box and I will address them as they come up. Oh, so many things. So one thing you said, Jamal, was equity was being weird. Was that was what you said? Was that you?
Yeah. No, equity was being weird.
And that we didn't know that we were gonna, we started and we didn't know if we were gonna be able to do it. So so any comments on that, especially from equity members' points of view? I mean, I know Michael can talk about from our point of view, there was just a lot of uncertainty. And Michael, I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Well, one thing I'll say is that we knew that we didn't know whether our shows were going to get approved. We didn't know that any shows were getting approved. There were rumors across the country. We were hearing about people that were performing outdoors under special circumstances, sometimes with plexiglass barriers. Sometimes people were just filming. And the union was not approving anything until like the day before rehearsals would start, which was usually a week after the stage manager would have already started. So things were really unsure for us and for everyone in the country that was trying to produce. And I know that one of the things that we did at APT was we worked with everybody that we hired and said, hey, we don't know if these shows are going to get shut down at any given moment. And we're going to try our best and we're going to give you a guarantee of such and such. It was something like, a third of your contract. Like if this gets shut down, we'll still pay out for the first third. So you can be looking for other work or something, because we just didn't know what was going to happen. I felt like, we worked really hard at it, but we also got really lucky in that we were able to produce all these 9 shows. And by the time we got a few up, it almost became a no-brainer that the rest of them were going to go up. But those first few were very scary. And there was a lot of work involved, and the union had a 60-page document and a 40-page document and stuff that led to like other documents that were like, I don't think I understand what they're getting at with HVAC, but if I can hire a bunch of professionals, maybe they can figure out what the union is after. And it was complicated, and we had to learn a whole new business to get there.
By the way, we've mentioned a couple times now our 9-show season. And I know those of you who are watching, because I know some of you are some of our super fans, are counting on your fingers and going, I only know of 8. So yeah, there's maybe going to be an announcement coming in the next month or so. So there you go. Good job tuning in today.
I will say, if I may jump in, that having that 1/3 guaranteed was huge. Absolutely huge. It's like, well, even if we can't get through the whole season, financially knowing I have this much coming allows your headspace to, entertain the possibility of moving on and like, okay, I have housing for this amount of time. And if this happens, then, and like watching these other theaters do what they are doing and watching what their seasons look like, it provided much needed stability, just knowing that third was going to be there no matter what.
Yeah, good point.
And the housing, and we guaranteed the housing for the full contract which is just one of those things that we have, we've got the housing, let's use it, let's share it.
Yeah.
And the one thing about equity or actors equity kind of holding things up is like, there's a lot of people who work here who are not part of the union. There's the actors union is the only union on campus besides some of our designers that operates, and they could have derailed a lot of us working because of their rules. And like the Zoom readings were great, but a lot of us who are behind the scenes can't do Zoom readings. So right. it was a lot touch and go that this one union is holding up a lot of people from working. Granted, they were trying to do it for safety, but a lot of us were like waiting on bated breath because what Actors Equity said affected what tech happened in our jobs.
And we had two other unions that were also very strict. Equity was the most strict of the three of them, but our directors union and our designers union were also in a position to shut down a play at any time. So it was a pretty scary place.
And Kelsey or Jamal or Ron, Kelsey, I feel like you had some back and forth with the union. I mean, how are you feeling about it? I don't want you to say anything that you don't want to say, but
well,
from the perspective, I'm interested in how that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it became really clear to me in the spring that Actors Equity was going to communicate with producers in a very certain way, and were responsible for communicating with their members in a different way. So I decided to be very communicative with my union. That's how I'll put it. And I was frustrated many times when I felt like, APT and those of us who work at APT, we're putting so much effort into following the rules and looking into HVAC and going really above and beyond. But because Equity was so overwhelmed with people who were submitting requests for productions, they just couldn't give us any special attention, which I do have compassion for. But at the same time, I was going to send a couple extra emails to see if maybe I could get a contract in my hands. And it just got, with COVID, I think all of us, we do our best to individually and collectively make decisions based on people's different safety thresholds, how they personally feel safe. And Equity did the same thing. They had their own opinion of how people should go about working. So yeah, that's the nicest I can be about it.
Jamal, you have your hand raised, please.
I'm gonna be more undiplomatic about it, I think, on my end here. I just knew a lot of people that were in Florida because I'd worked at Disney World, and Equity is part of that group as well. The problem, besides just COVID messing things up and our government not having the right protocols to give out so everyone could follow, is that Equity started making rules that applied to big cities only, and then applying it towards theme parks, regional theaters. That doesn't actually work, not as actually conducive. And the medicine or the safety measures for the vaccine and how to keep people safe was starting to catch up, and they were still keeping the same rules while not listening to its members. And that is the problem, which is why there's a lot of upheaval at this point in time with delegates and trying to get new blood in there to get people to listen. Producers were taken care of, actors were not. And that's the aftermath of all of this. So that's my criticism of Equity in general. Right now, I think they're at a place where they're asking for those things to be different, and we're trying to make that difference happen to protect our union and our members as best as we can. But that's where it was coming from. And unfortunately, it hit here and made things, I'm sure, so frustrating for Michael Broh and for everyone. I'm sure. I don't know why they couldn't have listened to their members more to have different contracts for different places, because there are different rules. There's different rules for people to live by. There are different. It is different. And a blanket statement to say that this is just how it goes for everyone does not work for people's areas. It just doesn't.
Yeah. All right.
It did seem like they were short-staffed and had a lot of trouble didn't have enough people to respond to all the things.
And you got to give credit to that, because I'm not saying that Equity wasn't doing it. I'm not saying that they were trying, but when it push came to shove, they were protecting the producers more than anything else. And now they have more members who are working from home. So now that reason is kaput.
Thank you. I appreciate your candor, Jamal. It's really, we all feel it. We all feel it. We have a couple questions. So Sarah Becker asks about what's it like to perform for a masked audience. I know that since sometime during Improbable Fiction, we made masks optional on the Hill, and I think all of the actors here working on have worked on Hill shows. So I would also add to that question, what about small audiences, masked small audiences? Elise, do you want to take that? You're on stage right now. Well, not at the moment, but this afternoon.
Soon though, very soon. I was just processing that question. I don't know that I have the adequate experience, because Cymbeline is kind of right in that sweet spot where the capacity is actually growing and masks are optional. And to be honest, it's not necessarily indifference. I mean, there's just COVID kind of heightens every single thing, right? Like, you lose your keys, and because it's COVID, it's even more like that. Anything kind of like has you tweak. So anytime I see folks in masks, I'm appreciative. I'm appreciative that that's the sign that somebody's looking out for themselves and others. So even if it is on stage, I'm not necessarily thinking about that. But it's just kind of the mark of where we are. And I think as an artist, it's important to kind of clock this time, because to what Jamal said, things are changing. We are moving in a direction where we are blatantly seeing folks, care deeply, and then folks really focus on themselves. So I don't want to use the word selfish, because everybody's just, trying to survive. So if I can make a masked person in the audience laugh, or even just emote anything, then I feel good. I feel like I'm able to do my job in the middle of a very, very traumatic time. So I guess that's how I feel.
Great.
Yeah.
Here we have another great question, which I just love this. When you were able to get back on stage this year or into the theater, in Lynn and Leah and Michael's case, what came to your mind where you really felt the joy of it again? What did that feel like? Where were you and how did it feel?
It's hard to peg a particular moment, honestly. I'd say that little spark of moment came when Michael Broh, I wasn't even in the theater, when Michael Broh called me and said, let's talk about 2021. I mean, huge. Because you're just like, when you're in the thick of it, it just feels like it's never ending. Like this is what life is now. This is my life, and it just seems like, I'm 100% positive that we all had those moments of like, just despair, like all this career that I've spent half my life building up, like it's crumbling, like it's crumbled. Literally all of my workplaces have been shut down, and just to get that phone call was amazing. I will say a particular, it was Rough Crossing. And at that point, Backstage, wardrobe, because we work so closely with actors. We had we had K95 masks whenever we were within 6 feet of an actor. And at the beginning, we were doing that. And we also had gloves on because Equity was still requiring that. And one of the moments that sticks out in my mind is the change in Rough Crossing where Jim Ridge comes off. It's during the transition where there's all, like the PAs are on stage and like Dee Dee's doing like his little flag thing and whatever. And Jim Ridge is like coming off stage, putting on another piece of clothing, going on stage, coming off. And those are like, that was like quick change for, Camilla, who's the other dresser up here, and myself, and we were like masked and like pouring sweat. And like, you know, anybody that's worn a K95 masks, like they're very suffocating is not the right word, but when it's, you know, the heat index is like 90 and then you're wearing these gloves, your hands are sweating on the inside. But he came off, and that first time that we got that change, and like he was like waiting for his cue light, I was like, yes. Camilla and I, like, she closed the door behind him and was like, high five, here it is. So good. So good.
That's awesome. That's wonderful.
I'd say that's a particular moment for me.
I remember my first day. I was the very first day I started was the first day any new seasonal employee was starting. I was like the first. I wasn't the first, but like that same day, I think like 3 of us started. And it was, I mean, it was so empty here. It was still a little, it was like crisp out, and there was still some snow in some places. I just remember getting uphill, and the buildings had been occupied. Like, we have been putting stuff in and out of them. It's like they hadn't been opened in 2 years, but just throwing up the roll doors on every single building we had uphill, like the clubhouse, the sheds, and just like letting the air come back in and being like, you're going to be occupied. And I think I literally spent the first day sweeping and killing spider webs just for like 8 hours, because the 2 years of growth had been in these buildings. And it was just like, breathe, let all the buildings breathe. And just like standing on stage being like, okay, these seats will soon be filled in smaller capacities, but, and just like, even when we're in the booth and we're watching the audience like fill in, like the first time I happened to be covering the light board for our first like 400 seat audience up the hill. And it just like, all of us were like, it feels like a real show here. It feels like old times, because it was starting to fill and people were in every section, and it was amazing. And even though we're not on stage and we still feel the like energy of the audience. And when they laugh, it's like, oh, it's so good to have like a group of strangers like laughing about the same thing. And like, you know, because we're all on this, like when we're on Zoom, like we see each other, and we all know that everybody watching on Zoom is pretty much like people we know. But when we're just in a group of strangers, and just like, we're like, oh, this feels like it used to, and it's so good to be back.
Leah, you're making Nancy McDaniel weepy with your story, she says. So good job on that. What about actors? What about being in front of an audience? Ron?
Well, yeah, I mean, from my experience with it, for me, I think it came in kind of waves, and I don't know that I ever fully allowed myself in a weird way to embrace the joy, because in the back of my mind, like I'll never like walking up the hill for the first rehearsal for Improbable Fiction, I was like, my God, it's happening. It's actually happening. Like, I'm about to walk into a room while having my phone in my hand, being like, any buzz that I hear or feel could be a text or a phone call or a notification saying, this happened. Actually, it's not going on. Never mind. Go home. And like walking into that room for Improbable Fiction masked up, and we had to read, and I was like, oh my gosh, it feels actually real. And so it being kind of a thing that's actually happening, but something that I'm not fully embracing because I don't know how real it is, and wanting to like gauge my expectations in that, because it felt so good to be in a room. Like when somebody said, ladies and gentlemen, we're called, like my heart, like the Grinch, grew freaking 3 sizes, because I was like, yeah. I was like, thank you, called. Oh, I missed saying that.
And like places everybody. Oh,
yeah. And even then, it wasn't until like actually entering at the top of Improbable Fiction for opening night that I was like, oh, no, wait, we made it. But I'm also on stage now, so I can't really embrace this moment. So I'm going to save that for later. And so it was crazy.
Somebody had their hand raised for a second, and then was it Elise? Yeah.
Was I? I forget that the little hand stays there, and then I get really nervous because I don't like doing that in real life. So I don't want to do it online. I'm just inspired to say something that was interesting to see up the hill is how the world, even though kind of during COVID, it felt like it was the same day, right? Like every day. But the seasons and the elements like totally took over the space. And it's really kind of, I don't know if the word is cool, but there's something to like a path that I remember walking that is now completely grown over. Or like when I sat in a seat for watching one of the scenes when we were up the hill and all of these hornets were like, hey, we have a nest down here now. And it was like a full grown thing. Like that nature is so, it's such a part of this place, right? That this theater is in, and how it did not stop. It kept thriving. We had a bunny in one of our runs for Cymbeline. This
was amazing.
Baby bunny that like hopped, and like those moments are. I took those for granted too, just because it's not. We're so small, right? Like it's so not. It's making art, but there's something bigger also happening all the time. And I don't know why, I was just inspired to say like, yeah, like we got to watch. Growth in all these other areas too. And there's been so many moments of that up the hill where I'll remember something that was completely prepared by man, but now like the elements have taken it over and we have to make our adjustments. I think there's something humbling about that, yet super honorable and respectable, at least in the up the hill stage.
Yeah. What else? We're just, go ahead, Kelsey.
Oh, are we at time?
We are, but we'll go at, folks are sticking with us for another couple minutes as long as you guys are okay.
So in Rough Crossing, I got to enter on this really high platform, and I would enter singing, and it was supposed to be like dramatic and a little diva-y. And the lyrics to my entrance were, "This could be the time." And Bill Brown, our director, kept saying, yeah, but like see the man that you're singing to and like think about how much you love him and all this. And he wasn't quite getting what he wanted from me. And then he pulled me aside just in rehearsal, and he goes, okay, when you walk out to sing this song, I want you to take the whole audience in and sing directly to them that this could be the time that we've been waiting for. And I was like, oh my God, no, I can't do it. But it was and then he kept that moment in the show. If you saw it, there were many of us in the cast who had a moment where we would come out and just like, look at the audience and say, hey guys, we're here. But just, as an actor, when you're doing it 8 times a week, it just gets a little bit more accessible. But every time I made that entrance, I was like, oh my God, there are 400 people here. So I got to actually, like Ron, you were saying, I got to actually take it in and be in that moment and be completely, fully appreciative of the fact that there was an audience and I was an actor acting. And I'm so grateful he gave me that direction, because I was so nervous about actually being in front of an audience and not just weeping every time. So I got to make it part of the performance.
Jamal, were you going to say something? No.
Hold on. Still, it's so weird. Unmuting and muting yourself. No, it's just that being in front of those audiences and just like, for me, masks are cool sometimes when you see that there's a mask place, not just because you feel like you're a little safe, but also just because, like, just in case you are being distracted by someone's facial expression, you don't have to worry about it anymore. You can just go on with your show, because you're trying to make sure that you're connected to the people that are on stage. Sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes our energy as performers can wane based on what the audience is giving us. And that sometimes is a problem for our brains as performers. And we can't allow that to happen, because we have a job to do. We have people to entertain. We have a show and story to tell. So it was weird, of course, coming back and being like, oh my gosh, we're doing live theater. I see people out here and I hope that they're having a great time. And then finally they're having a great time. Like Bill Brown brought up in the first rehearsal, something that I felt like everyone was saying, but we just didn't say it out loud. He was like, does anyone feel nervous about doing this? And we were like, oh, do I even know how to act anymore? It was great. It was a great question. I mean, obviously through the season, I feel like we all know how to act, but it was just funny to have that be like, oh my gosh, I have not been on a stage. I've not been able to connect with people. I have not been able to connect with people. Like, connection is important. And when we don't have it, as we were seeing a lot, that we might've been taking connection for granted in a lot of different ways, it is a gift to have. We function with connection. So I was just ecstatic to be on stage again And I was glad to do the show. I was glad everyone enjoyed it. So that's my thing.
Thank you all so much. Thank you to our panelists, and thank you to those attendees who are joining us. I wish we had another hour to talk, but this has been wonderful, and thank you so much all for your time. And we'll see you all at APT.